slide. So do I just
Just,
put this thing here? Or?
you just go forward.
Yep, you're on. Oh, great. Yeah, so I did my own slide. It doesn't look as flash. What you just heard from May is actually my story as a way, or rather, it's the one I pull out when I'm trying to impress a bunch of extremely brainy overachievers like yourselves, and to try and convince you to listen to me instead of checking your phones or whatever. So we're all kind of like this, you know, where we have the stories that we tell about ourselves, and these stories change according to who we're talking to. And what we want people to think of us, really. We understand that how well we tell these stories and what we tell others can change how we are treated. And this is kind of what I want to talk about today. So, firstly, who here thinks that stories are important? Everybody. Fantastic. And who would like to tell a better story about themselves? Everybody? Yeah? Well, sometimes maybe you think you're pretty good at telling stories about yourself already because you've had lots of practice. And who would like a little story right now? Anyone? Right, okay. So, in 1902, the SS Ventnor sank in the Hokianga Harbour along with the bones of 499 Chinese miners who were bound for the ancestral villages in Canton where they were to be buried among their family. And a century later, a young man arrives in the far north to try and find one of these ancestors. Now, how did you react to that little story? That was 15 seconds. Did you get a bit of a physical response? Some people do when I tell them the story. And this is what I want to say. The best stories, they provoke an emotional response, some sort of resonance, some sort of emotional resonance. They're integral to the human condition. This is how we learn, this is how we connect. We understand cause and effect, morals and development through stories. And as you can tell, I'm the one in yellow. This starts from a very early age, this need to tell stories. My youngest child was 6 months old, and this morning I was doing this to him. And it was interesting. He understands stories already. He understands the storyline because he knows when I do this, I disappear, and he starts to get a bit anxious. And then when I open again, he suddenly goes, "Whoa, she's back again! That's fantastic!" and he laughs. And so that is a story that he loves. Stories are instinctive and powerful. If you control your story, you have power. And I'm going to say that again because that's really important. If you control your story, you have power. You can call a story different things. So marketers call them a sound, or in marketing terms I don't understand. Filmmakers, they'll call them a treatment. For businesses, they might call them brands. I personally, as a writer, don't really like the idea of a brand. I kind of go, ooh, brand, because the problem with calling it a brand is that it implies it's made up, it's not real. Whereas in actual fact, stories have to be real to be powerful. A story has to be real. It can't be trademarked either, because that implies it's a private story that not anybody can share. Whereas in fact, stories are the most powerful when they're shared. They allow us to connect with others, I've said that before. So, you know, your bio, your CV, your pitch, that elevator pitch, or even just meeting someone over dinner and telling them a story. We're going to have cocktails later, we're going to swap a lot of stories. They're all stories. They're all ways of making connections and building and layering on that first story, wrapping around that original connection. They're more important to take with you to a job interview than that really great suit and that really expensive briefcase that you bought, although actually going shopping for them was quite fun as well. I am a writer, so I do the stories. So I figured, since there are a lot of business people, and I don't really have a lot to offer in terms of business tips, but I can offer writing tips to you guys. So, these are the tips for constructing a good story that I've learned. Firstly, truth. This is really, really important. If you are not telling the truth, even if it's fictional, the audience will get you and find you out straight away. You have to insist on being authentic. Number 2, respect the audience as intelligent people who think, engage. Forget all that stuff about the lowest common denominator. I hate that when they talk about it. You have to respect your audience for them to respect you. Details. We want to see that it's really you. that you're not lying or you're making it up. Strangely enough, the more detailed, the more individual that you make your story, the more universally it resonates. That seems weird, but it works. People are drawn to the similarities in their lives, so when you start telling a story, they'll start going, oh yeah, me too. And that's what happens when I put my plays in front of an audience on stage. That's what happens when you tell your story to the world. Whatever the story is that you want to tell, the story of your business, the story of your life. Beginning, middle, end. You've heard this before. I could also call it hook, development, punchline, if you're talking about selling a story about a product that you're making. So you've got to hook them in with something. Do you want to know about this? What do you want to make better in your lives? Develop it. This is why. Punchline. This is how. So that's what all stories are like. Keep it succinct but deep. In other words, use the least words to the most effect. Say the most that you can with the least number of words, and if you can, layer your thoughts and ideas underneath so that they can dig deep, they can keep on going back and dig deep and find more and more stuff. Use metaphor, connotation. People want to stay and dig in and ponder your story, and if you need to give them that reason. And finally, leave gaps for the reader. So there's that thing that if you leave the white space on the page or the pauses in a script, then that allows the thoughts and the personalities of your audience to flow into that space, and they fill that space with themselves, and therefore they engage with the story more. They're smart, remember, you're treating them as smart, intelligent, emotional human beings, so they'll be able to put their own story in there, and therefore they'll take your story on board better. That's basically old hand writing tips. Don't tell them everything, trust them to make their own conclusions, and they will be more invested in the ideas that you communicate. So if you control your story, you have power. It applies to the world outside of business, and I guess from my point of view as a writer who writes a lot of stories to the Asian community, my final point I'd like to make is that having a voice or taking control of your own voice leads to empowerment and not just of yourself. So I've just got a few slides. So this is my first play, Lantern, which was a story which was actually based a lot on the personal stories of my parents and the people I saw around me. And it just talked about the struggles of a family to stay together at Chinese New Year. Another story, the first Asian AB. I'm not allowed to call it all black, it's a trademark. But the first Asian AB was actually a story about a coming of age between a simple friendship between two boys with rugby in between. I actually had to study up on rugby during the World Cup to write this, so I knew nothing about rugby. And the bone feeder, which is actually that story I told you at the beginning. So the SS Vendel, a real ship, real bones that sank in the Hokianga Harbour in 1902. I imagined what it would be like to travel up north and look for the bones of my ancestor, and I wrote a play about it. So these are really personal stories. These stories belong to people. There are people in this room I know that this story actually personally belongs to. So and finally, I guess I wanted to say that I'm very lucky as a writer and as a New Zealander really, because I'm fluent in the dominant language and culture here. I've been encouraged to write from a young age as well. I've always been the writer in my family. So finding my voice comes really easily. I've always been really confident about being a writer. But in recent times, I've realised that actually other people are not so confident telling their stories. And so I've started running initiatives. So New Kiwi Women Write, a little advertorial. There's another there's a new writing course that's starting in November. It's free. If you are a woman and you weren't born in New Zealand, please sign up for it. It's really fun. But New Kiwi Women, we get a bunch of wonderful women who have had wonderful, interesting lives and are very, very confident in their own business and personal lives to come together and indulge the creative side of themselves, and then we publish an anthology of their writings which joins the canon of Kiwi literature. And as you can see, it's a wonderful bonding experience, and hopefully it is the start of a writing community for Asian writers. And not just Asians, actually migrant writers, because they're not all Asian. I also have recently been working with other people on theatre shows, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to dash off after this talk because I'm actually running my own theatre workshop at Pacific this week, so I have to run back to my workshop and then I'll be back to doing the cocktails. But I'm working on a show called Paper Boats, which is about the histories of Chinese Kiwi women. So, so finally, I guess I believe that we have to help others tell their stories. And my plea to you is, firstly, please take control of your own story. Please tell your story. Don't let anybody else tell it for you because that's how you retain your own personal control and power over your story. And secondly, please consider helping other people to tell their story. Thank you.